There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to another Friday Reads. This one's going to be a doozy. It's a good thing I don't have any personal news other than we had a fabulous birthday celebration for my mom's 80th birthday. The family all congregated at the farm. There's a couple pictures. That was lovely. And all I've done since I got back into town on Sunday night, I think, was a little bit of teaching online and reading. I don't have any new Patreons. I value the patrons I have very much, and I'm always grateful for more support from any of yous who haven't signed on so far, and there's other ways to contribute. Look in the show notes, but no Patreon news other than that my patrons over there are giving me so much support on several different levels, including financial, and I couldn't be more appreciative. And because I've done so much reading this week, I've only managed to put up 2 videos, one on BookTube and one on Patreon. So here, and both of them, especially the one on BookTube, the Sharon Butala interview, I'm very pleased with. So here is the week in review.
I wanted to indicate a shift in thinking patterns, a shift out of a regular life into something much more spiritual, emotional, that sort of thing. And there are all kinds of ways that artists have done that in film and in novels, but I opened my book with a severe concussion on an icy cement sidewalk in downtown Calgary, where my character is rushing off to her retirement lunch in the middle of a minor blizzard, slips on the ice, which she wouldn't have done if she hadn't been in such a hurry. And then her whole life from that moment changes.
It was a shattering experience, and you've written it so, I'm going to say beautifully. It's so vivid and takes the reader so deep into what that must have been like to have such a severe concussion and the waking up 2 weeks later not having a clue what's going on.
Title comes from the protagonist, George Ticknor. He's been invited by his oldest friend to go to a dinner party. And there's a twist that is clearly indicated on the back cover that I'm not going to reveal to you, but there is a twist. I am not filming outside for it's overcast but not raining, for the simple fact that I have so many books to talk about. I didn't want to carry them all the way out somewhere. So I'm inside. And I'm filming this Friday Reads very late. Like I think it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm usually finished filming by about 9 in the morning on average. So I got up and finished, I think, 3 more books this morning. 2 for sure, maybe 3. And then was in desperate need of a nap. So here I am. Here are my stats. I started 1 and I've already finished it. I have bailed on 2. And I have finished, are you sitting down? I've finished 8 books. I am proud of myself. I'm not sure if I'm proud of myself, but it's the biggest number of books I've finished possibly in my whole BookTube career. And I very purposely wanted to finish as many books as possible to clear a big space to start Pride Month reading and other fabulous reading commitments. And I have done so, and I'm going to fill it probably right back up to where it was, because I've earned it. So let's get to the books. I'll tell you about my bails. I bailed on this Furrowed Middlebrow book, Yoked with a Lamb by Molly Clavering, originally published, 1938? Yes, I think I read 2 books published in 1938. Or I didn't read this one, but I read about half. This is for the Furrowed Middlebrow Book Club on Litzy that my dear friend Leah is organizing, and I don't think she's aware that I've bailed on it yet. This was just too silly. Furrowed Middlebrow are hit and miss for me. Some of them I really love, and you've heard me talk about those. Ursula Orange, and most recently Susan Scarlett. This one didn't land for me. Molly Clavering was a Scottish novelist, and so that part really held my interest. And it had a really interesting premise, set in probably the 1930s, in a little town in Scotland. And they were like the upper class people. I don't know how to talk about class, unless it's the royal family, then I'm pretty sure of what I'm talking about. But lower down nobles and stuff I miss so much about class, but they seem to be the upper crust of the town. A young husband and wife had split up a decade before, 5 years before, and left the town, and the man shacked up with another woman, but now suddenly they're coming back to inhabit the manor house again as a couple and reunite. And so there's all kinds of gossip in the community. So that was a pretty interesting opening premise. And the main character was a cousin of, I've forgotten, a cousin of one of them. And she was getting the house ready for them to come back to. She had a lot of vim and vinegar. I really liked her. But for all the interesting plot there was to explore, by the halfway mark, it was getting so bogged down in stupid stuff that at the halfway point, I think I read about half, the husband has just come back, and he hasn't seen his wife since he left her a decade ago or whatever. And then we're spending 10 pages on their kid. Their son has a dog that the family doesn't know he has, and the protagonist, this distant cousin, helps him sneak it out of the house to take it for a walk. And that went on for pages, and I thought, this is just such low stakes stuff when there's a bunch of high. I don't mean that I needed it to be dramatic instead of a comedy, absolutely not. But there was so much big story to explore, and it was just these set pieces of kind of ridiculous, absurd, low stakes little vignettes, so I bailed. I had a bite-sized book chat with Marilyn Maya Mendoza about another of Clavering's novels. What was it? Mrs. Lorimer's Quiet Summer, which was a later novel, 1953, that sounded really good. I will definitely try that one, but this one didn't work. I hope Amelia is watching, because she'll be really pleased about this next bail, and I hope Scott and Nell aren't, because they're not going to be so happy. I bailed about, I forget, I think about halfway through Sorrow and Bliss by 120 pages, I remember, in my bail review. I said I got to page 120, and well, it really grabbed me at first. It just let go of me soon after the beginning, and progressively just, I felt like I was reading a shitty episode of Dynasty. Like, it was just the characters were not full-bodied. There was a serious issue of mental illness at the heart of the protagonist's experience in this novel, but that was given such short shrift by all these villainous characters. Her first husband, I really started to get turned off. It felt like Dynasty. Like, could I have some nuance, please? Without that nuance, the comedy stopped working for me, and I certainly didn't care about any of the characters, so I packed her in. So Amelia was disgusted with me for enjoying the opening. So I think I'm back in Amelia's good books. Scott, now, are we okay? All right, so now I have finished 8 books. So I'm going to tell you about them, so go get a cup of tea or a martini and get comfortable. The first one that I finished this week, I don't have a copy, and I told you before I started 1, it's actually 2, and I started 2 and finished 2. 1 was a library book I had out, and I realized this week that it was due back at the library, I think Wednesday, and with no possibility of renewal, so I decided to just read it. It was a novella, and that is Kick the Latch by Kathryn Scanlan. It's been a darling on bookish Twitter, and I was curious about it, even though it was about horse racing, which is, I can't think of a topic that's less interesting to me, to see what all the fuss was about, and I'm glad that I did. It was I think all the books I finished, let's see, of the 8 books I finished, 7 were 5-star reads, and 1 was a 3-star read. And that is because I bail on books, really, that are gonna, I don't know if I've ever bailed on a book that I thought was only gonna be a 4-star read, but maybe I need to get into the habit of that. But certainly anything that's going to be a 3-star or less, what is the point of finishing it, I ask you? So that's why I have so many 5-star reads. There's a method to my madness, and I want to evangelize and get you all to bail more, so you can read more books that are worth finishing. So, Kick the Latch. It's about 140 pages or something, but I think this one's going to really stay with me. It's based on the author's interviews with a friend of her mother's. And this friend was an elderly, retired, female racing horse trainer, and then Kathryn Scanlan shaped it into kind of autofiction. I don't know what you call it, doesn't matter. It read like a series of vignettes that definitely resonated one with the other, and it was a very satisfying read. And so I was not at all interested going in about horse racing, and I'm coming out on the other side of this book, Kick the Latch. I know a whole bunch about horse racing, and the one thing that I know, even though this book is not preachy, I think horse racing should be abolished. It's disgustingly violent towards the animals. The protagonist and a lot of the people that she worked with in the horse racing industry loved horses, but horses kept getting, killed and their legs broken, and they'd be shot, and it was really grotesque in places. The protagonist, who was a real person, she thought the animal abuse was confined to the lower level, like the regional, but when you got up to the top professional horse racing, there wasn't so much abuse of animals. I'm not sure. I came away with it just a loathing. Like I hate zoos are morally repugnant. Marine science centers are morally repugnant. Well, I will add to that, horse racing is disgusting. And the horse racing world that she describes was so fascinating, and I was shocked at how fascinating I found it. It was really spare, like each little vignette was a page or a paragraph long, but the cumulative effect of all that was to really understand this woman and the sexism. It was an all-male industry except for her. It's a powerful story. I don't suppose it's a story for everyone. I'm going to be thinking about it for a long time. On audio, I finished this collection of short stories, Afterparties by Anthony Veasna, a gay Cambodian-American writer, and this was his only publication, sadly. It was published posthumously. He died of an accidental overdose. For the reading world, it is a tragedy because this was a very, very fine, accomplished, important collection of short stories. I didn't know very much about the Cambodian experience, certainly not the Cambodian-American experience, certainly not what it's like to be a gay Cambodian man. This book took me into those worlds in a way that made me think new thoughts about how sexuality can shape character and the power of the cultures we come from and how those rituals screw us up and make us whole. It's kind of split right down the middle. Oh, these stories were great. Some better than others, but it was definitely a really accomplished collection. I told you before about the shop. Oh, in the first half, the one where he's having a kind of a fuck buddy relationship with somebody he grew up with that was a couple years older than him, and then it gets much more emotionally satisfying, and that was portrayed with a graphic sexuality that I don't think the story would have been as powerful if the graphic sex scenes and that were threaded through with emotional awareness. I don't think it would have been as powerful of a story. Most times the graphic sex in fiction doesn't work. It takes a really talented writer to make it work. But there were so many others. I also am glad that I have the book. I did it completely on audio, but I've had the book for a long time. And I need to reread books more often. This is one that I would like to reread because I think that there were some characters that were threaded through, and I'm going to feel really stupid if all of the characters were threaded through all of the stories, that it was a collection of linked short stories, but I think there were some characters, but I don't pay very much attention to characters' names when I'm listening on audio. I don't pay very much attention to characters' names at the best of time, but I just think this is one that I would get a lot more out of on a reread. It's so sad that there won't be any more books by Anthony Veasna, not any other manuscripts lying around that I'm aware of that are going to come out later, but this was wonderful. This was the only one that was disappointing that I didn't bail on, and it was so short that I just kept going, and that's this work of German autofiction, Paula by Sandra Hoffmann, translated from the German by Katie Derbyshire. I thought this was really kind of boring, actually. To me, lots of people liked it a lot better than I did. The author's grandma got pregnant and would never told anybody who the father was, and that was like in the World War II era. And so the author's mother was raised by a single mother and never knew who her father was. And so it's an exploration of that. The exploration did not hold my interest, and especially the auto-fictional where she was imagining things. I could hardly stay awake for this, so I don't recommend it, but look on Goodreads. There's lots of people, including people that are big fans of my channels, who loved it. And I also started and finished another audiobook, and I told you about this last week, Eastbound by Maylis de Kerangal, a French writer, and it's translated from the French by Jessica Moore. And I did this on audio. I couldn't believe that Libby had an audiobook for an archipelago book. That's the first I've ever seen. I hope that's a new trend. It was a 2-hour audiobook, and I did it late this week and really, really enjoyed it. Loved it. I had a bite-sized book chat with Joseph from Calgary of the book blog Rough Ghosts. I'll put a link to that chat, and that's what put the book on my radar, and boy, I'm ever glad. I agree with everything he said about it, and I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it here, but the premise is it's set about a decade ago in Russia, and a French woman has left her lover, her Russian lover. It's complicated, but she has to go almost to the other side of Russia in order to get back to where she can go back to Paris. So she's kind of going the wrong way, but it was a very impulsive decision to leave her lover. And then she meets a young Russian soldier who's on his way to what was the war that Russia was, what genocide was Russia committing 10 years ago? Was it Chechnya? Anyway, so he was going to military service, and he didn't want to go, and he did. This kid, he was 20 years old. The woman was more like 40, I think, or 35, the French woman. And he did everything he could to get out of having to do the military service. He tried to get a girl pregnant. This was the part of his background where I instantaneously became fascinated by him. He picked this woman up because if he could get somebody pregnant, that would absolve him of having to go serve his draft, or at least postpone it or whatever. And he spent the night with this young woman that he picked up, and then just cuddled with her. He couldn't bring himself to do it. I thought, oh, I like that. Now he's on the train, and it's a 10-hour, 12-hour train trip out to wherever in Siberia. And he gets, beat up by other recruits on the train, and he's just out of his element. And so he's desperately trying to figure out a way to escape, and he ends up hiding in this French woman's, compartment. They don't speak, they don't have a language in common, and she helps him hide. Parts of it are very fast-paced because the army dudes are looking for him, so there's lots of suspense about that, and beautifully reflective about both of their lives. They're both kind of on a journey that they don't want to be on, or there's lots of metaphors. She's going the wrong way to get back home, and he didn't want to leave home, and he's trying to figure out how to escape. It's so beautifully told. Rich language, great translation, obviously. That was incredible. Speaking of incredible, I started this book for Black History Month. What is that? Was that in February? Yes. I finally finished it. The Office of Historical Corrections, a short story collection, the second short story collection by Danielle Evans. And because I loved this as much as I did, after having loved her debut short story collection, Suffocate Your Own Fool Self, she is now one of my favorite writers. I have this project that I will eventually want to get started on, of having framed photographs of all of my favorite writers on the wall here in my library, and she's added to that list. Alice Munro has retired. I can't think of anybody who writes short stories that are better than hers that's writing today. I can't think of Morgan Talty is maybe one of her peers, but oh my God. So if you don't know, Danielle Evans is a Black American writer. Her first collection, Before You Suffocate Your Own Fool Self, I think I mistitled it a minute ago, was about kind of messy relationships and friendships between exes and kind of alternative relationships, and I just loved it. And the stories were so layered and literary and fabulously inventive in terms of the lives of the characters she wrote about. And this one has some of that, but it also goes quite a bit more into Black history and the social political aspects of race. I don't think there was an unsuccessful story in the bunch. The first story I remember telling you about way back in February, Happily Ever After. I just remember that I really needed a hug after reading it. I can remember not only the cafe that I read it in, but the table I was sitting at. That's how much of an impact it had on me. But what I really want to try to describe is the novella at the end. The novella is the title is of the novella, which is 100 pages, The Office of Historical Corrections. And this one was almost, well, there was something kind of slipstreamy about it. There were a couple times where I thought, oh, is this starting to lose me? Is this kind of absurd? But no, it never lost me once. It may be a while before I reread the entire collection, but I think I'm going to reread this novella quite soon. It was so fascinating. So it's the Office of Historical Corrections in this fictional world is a government department that some one-term congressman managed to pass legislation to create it and fund it. And it's such a comment on the politics of the politics of right now. When was this book was published? About 2 years ago, I think. 2020. So yeah, 3 years ago. And the Office of Historical Corrections their mission is to correct untruths in advertising or any place in society that misstates historical facts. Their mandate is also not to stir up controversies and not to take sides on things where there's no clear historical record, not to overstep their bounds, but wherever they find something that's just not correct, like the example at the beginning of this novella is in a bakery, there's a poster advertising it's Juneteenth, and the description of what Juneteenth was just basically incorrect. It said celebrates the anniversary of the emancipation of the enslaved people, which, no, that's not true. And so the protagonist of the story, she goes and prints out a label with the true history and tells them to put it over the mistake on their advertising or their poster or whatever. Like I say, in the media and movies, anything. That's their mandate. And it's not kind of an Orwellian thing. It seems to be just like, oh, this is actually kind of a good idea, maybe. We need this. I think America needs it, and Canada too. Oh my God. Probably, I think we actually do need something like that isn't Orwellian, that isn't too Big Brother, but just like, no, that's not true, and here's the true story. But it's obviously kind of slipstreamy. The story goes from there, and I talked about how Danielle Ovens in her first collection was very much preoccupied with wonderfully messy stuff going on, and she carries that preoccupation into this collection and into this novella in particular, in that two black women who were childhood frenemies find themselves working for the Office of Historical Corrections, and then their relationship is threaded throughout, as well as the protagonist's romantic sexual relationships, one with a white guy and one with a black guy, the actions they take at work, correcting the historical record, especially about black history. Oh my God, it was riveting. Holy smokes. And it had humor, and it was sexy. I was spellbound. Danielle Evans, where is your next book? I'm waiting. Holy smokes. I passionately recommend it to you. I have 3 more to tell you about, and these I all finished this morning. So I finally finished Rosamond Lehman's second novel, chronologically, A Note in Music. And this was published in 1938 too, was it not? Oh, no, it wasn't. I misspoke. This was published in 1930. I love this with all my heart. I think I'm going to try to do a full review, but I may not have time. So let me tell you a little bit about it. It is set in northern England, and there is an unhappily married couple. Grace is the protagonist, really, although that's a bit arguable because Lehman devotes a lot of time to some of the other major characters, but I would say that Grace is the protagonist, and she is not conventionally beautiful. She has the kind of beauty that she has to be in the right mood before you notice her appearance. And I've always felt that was my beauty. If I was in a bad mood or feeling depressed or self-conscious, nobody noticed me. But if I was having a good day, I don't just mean a good hair day, but like soulful, in a soulful level, everybody thought I looked really good. So there's lots of people like that. Maybe most of us are like that. And don't you just hate the people that can be really depressed and still look hot? But anyway, I digress. So Grace is like that. I would describe her husband as kind of benign, but not the best match for her, and they're not companion at all. Through her husband's work, she meets a new young employee, co-worker of her husband's, much younger, like he's maybe 25, maybe 30, and I think she might be 40. Beautiful gold-haired boy, Hugh. And then there's other characters. I'm not going to describe much more about the plot, but instead, try to describe the tone of this novel, because Rosamond Lehman, it was just goes so deep into her character work, and she has such a compassionate stance toward all of her characters. Like, there were no characters to hate in this book, and nobody was perfect. I suppose you could say that about any good novel, but boy, you sure can say it about Rosamond Lehman. This is my third novel by her. I started with one of her later novels, and then I thought, oh, I'm going to circle back. So I did her debut novel a year ago, Dusty Answer, and this is her second novel, and I'm going to keep going. I'm maybe going to pick up the pace, not just restrict it to one a year. The depth at which she renders her characters' yearnings and emotions and musings, and the achingly beautiful prose where she situates all the yearning and emoting within the natural world or within the room of the house where you feel everything to do with the setting, and that it's impossible to separate the character and what they're actually experiencing from the environment that they're in. A lot of the important scenes in this novel happen in parks or out for a walk or in a little boat in a pond. And the beauty of the natural surroundings is also something that I don't usually pay attention to, but you certainly can't help but be riveted by the way that Rosamond Lehman creates the world, natural or architectural or whatever, of her characters. This was the kind of reading experience where I felt a really subjective correlation of my own experience, my own relationships with almost all of the characters. Oh, and there was a really interesting gay subtext. I want to pick Roz's brain and her daughter Tilly of Tilly Shelf's brain. Roz told me that this is Tilly's favorite Rosamond Lehman, and I see that Tilly has a full review. I haven't watched it yet. I'll put a link to her full review, but I want to pick their lovely brains about the gay plot. How gay was it? That was a fascinating part of it, but I love these characters. I love this novel. I don't know what else to say about it, and probably Tilly has said it better, so if I feel I have anything to add to what Tilly said, I may do a full review, but otherwise, if I haven't sold you on Rosamond Lehman yet, I have failed at one of my more important missions in life. Please consider giving her a try, and this might be as good a place as any to start, although I did really like her debut novel, Dusty Answer, and her later novel, her 1953 novel, The Echoing Grove, just blew me out of the water. So yeah, she is one of my favorite writers too. I've now read 3 and loved every one. I'm gonna have to start giving up bookshelf space for all the photos of my favorite writers that I intend to get up on my wall. I also finished this memoir, Elizabeth and Ivy by Robert Liddell. And this is kind of an Amazon print-on-demand thing, not very attractive. Published in 1986. Robert Liddell, I've just got out the calculator to figure out how old he would have been. He was 78 when he published this. And he was a gay author that lived most of his adult life outside of the UK, in Egypt and Greece. This is his memoir about his friendship with Ivy Compton-Burnett and the novelist Elizabeth Taylor. And those two authors' friendship one with the other. And it was absolutely fascinating. Robert Liddell, I don't think anybody reads him today. I haven't read any of his fiction. I want to. He went to Oxford with Barbara Pym, and they were lifelong besties. That's why I knew about him, and that's why I got this book. I have a book of his literary criticism of Barbara Pym on the shelf that I haven't read, but I'm really glad that I finally read this. So if you have any interest in Elizabeth Taylor, Ivy Compton-Burnett, or any of their contemporaries, you would love this. It's short, although it feels longer. It's 122 pages. It's small, tight, but it's beautifully written. He's an old-fashioned, his prose is old-fashioned. I enjoyed the writing here. It's full of gossip. Liddell knew Ivy Compton-Burnett and her lover, although I don't think she would have ever used that word lover, Margaret Jourdain, personally before he left the UK. I can't remember what, let's see. The late 1930s is when Liddell left the UK, and he never came back. And he died abroad in 1992, and he never came back, as far as I'm aware. I mean, he may have come back for a visit, but I don't think he even did that. He came from a very unhappy family life, which is the theme of many of his novels, so I think that was the main reason. But he knew Ivy Compton-Burnett personally until he left in the 1930s, and then they corresponded until the end of her life, and she died in about 1969. So his friendship was strictly epistolary for decades and decades. And kind of similarly, he and Elizabeth Taylor struck up a epistolary friendship, and they didn't meet for maybe 10 or 15 years until she started vacationing in Greece, where he was then living. And he didn't really, they both felt maybe they should never meet, but they decided to meet, and they met 5 or 10 times before she died in 1976, I want to say. Meanwhile, Elizabeth Taylor was friends with Ivy Compton-Burnett and going over to her house for tea and stuff, and she would write these very descriptive letters about, and they couldn't help poke fun at the, it's hard not to poke fun. Just look at a picture of Ivy Compton-Burnett and you just want to poke fun. There's more than just gossip in here, but there's a lot of gossip. I can't believe how many writers, 20th century British writers, hated Kathryn Mansfield. And I don't mean that they just hated her writing. I was quite unimpressed with her short stories, to be honest. But they hated her as a person, and all these 3 people had no use for her. Ivy Compton-Burnett didn't like this person and that person, and she thought E.M. Forster was quite overrated. Anyway, there's all that's in here, and that was just fabulous. But there's also some really... Liddell is a really great literary critic, so the way he describes their novels gives me a better grounding to read both of these writers. I haven't had any success with Compton-Burnett's novels. I tried one and couldn't finish it. And I haven't had that much success with Elizabeth Taylor. I loved her Mrs. Palfrey at the Claremont. I absolutely loved that book, and I've not had good luck with anything else I've tried. But I feel like now it's maybe time for me to try her again, and maybe some of her short stories. This book was a great introduction to both of them as people, and as writers. It wasn't a breezy read, but it was absolutely fascinating, and there was funny parts, some of the excerpts from the letters, and especially the anecdotes about Ivy Compton-Burnett, because she was so weird. I put up I might as well. I'll read it to you. I put this up all over social media when I found it, and I sent it, I think, to Joe Smith and to Curtis, because Curtis is a fan of her writing. This is an excerpt from a letter from Elizabeth Taylor to Robert Liddell about Taylor having lunch at Ivy Compton-Burnett's in 1953. Luncheon, hot gammon, I don't know what gammon is, hot gammon, cabbage, sauté potatoes, raspberry fool with dollops of cream. And then, oh dear, a camembert of a mahogany color. It had gone through all its stages. Not helped by, so delicious to eat, but it makes the whole flat smell as if the drains were wrong. She was wonderfully kind and maternal to me, as she has once or twice been before. She gave me all the blobs of cream on the raspberry fool, as if I were a child. It'll be a while before I'm ready to try Camembert cheese again. But I'm getting closer to trying Ivy Compton-Burnett's fiction again. And now, to finish up for something completely different, late this morning, I finished Darryl by Jackie Ess. Jackie Ess is a trans writer, an American trans writer. This is their debut. No, it's Jackie Ess's pronouns are she, her, and this is her debut. Oh my god, I love this. It's one of the weirdest books, one of the most unusual works of fiction I've ever read, and it's also, I don't know how to recommend it to anybody, so I'll try to explain it. I know that it's a favorite of Scott and Nell's, so if I find that they've done a full review or something, I'll put a link to it. You can certainly find interviews with Jackie Ess online. Darryl is a very unsettled, adorable, straight man in his 40s who is exploring the cuck lifestyle, cuck being short for cuckolding, and he, for his own autobiographical, psychological reasons, enjoys watching other men, especially well-endowed men, have sex with his wife. Now, knowing that that's what the book was about was such a turnoff for me that it's taken me 2 or 3 years to get to it, and maybe it was the right time, but the way that his character, it's a first-person narrative, and it kind of reads like blog entries or something. It's told on a very personal level, and Darryl is a very open character who wants to explore everything, and he has a naivete about the world and a curiosity about the world that by page 3, the cuckolding thing ceased to be an issue. And it is one of the major aspects of the story, but this novel is about everything. Certainly everything to do with gender and sexuality. This is a huge literary accomplishment. A trans woman writing a story about a straight guy, and then he's got a fluid identity, and you have to read the book. I'm not going to give any of it away. He has an unstable sense of self that is so beautiful and dangerous, and both elements are here, and hilarious. So beauty, danger, and comedy, humor are the three main ways that this story is told, and the three main kind of tones of the book. I just loved Darryl, and I have to say, even though the things that he experimented with are not things that I have any interest in experimenting with, the lifestyles he was open to and curious about, I may maybe have some curiosity about, but I don't have any personal experience or interest in for myself. I related to him to a really troubling degree in terms of the blend of openness, curiosity, but also naivete and ability to get under the influence of people that didn't have his best interests in mind, because those are kind of two sides of the same coin, certainly for him, but also with me. So I kind of squirmed through parts of this story as well. It's so wonderfully written. If it takes you 2 or 3 years to, like it did me, to kind of summon up the wherewithal to give it a try, knowing that there isn't a lot of graphic sex. I mean, there's a lot of I don't think there's any narrations of sex scenes that are more than 1 sentence long. So it's not a graphic, but they're among many other important things that he is obsessed with and always thinking about and writing about. He is obsessed with well-endowed straight men, and he is deeply fascinated by trans issues and gay stuff and gay people, all the different sexual subcultures. There is an openness to everything that is really refreshing and sometimes really funny, and he's also very judgmental. There's hilarious scenes where he is just going apeshit in his mind about a new age type guy. Just about made me pee my pants. So he doesn't love everybody, but he's got a wide array of people and lifestyles and kinks that he's really open to and curious about. He's also, doesn't have perfect insight into really any of it, so that's part of the humor. But, oh my God, I just love this novel. It's not for everybody, and I don't know what to say about it beyond that. Jackie Ess says she didn't want to write the typical trans novel that was about the trans experience or transitioning. She wanted to create a literature where trans writers can write about everybody. And holy smokes, everybody is in this novel. Most of them are in one character, the titular character. Absolutely amazing. All right, that's what I finished. Holy smokes, I have been unedited. I've been talking for an hour. I'm going to start almost as much. In fact, I may be starting as much as I have finished. So in order to be a little bit more brief, anything that's on my Pride Month TBR, I'm not going to say very much about it because you can go check that out, or you've already seen that video. I'm starting a few other things as well. The audiobook that I'll be starting is Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead by Emily Austin. There's more information about that in my TBR. One of the books that I'm going to start is from Bookspin. No, Rick has not come back, but somebody's doing Bookspin on Litzy, and I just found out about it, and so I put up a list of 20 books, and whoever that person is, I don't know them. They did their book skip spin, and this is one of the 2 books that I'm going to be reading this month, and this is quite a new acquisition. Isobel and Emile by Alan Reed. Look at that cover. So they're the main characters. They're a couple. I don't know if they're married or whatever, but they wake up one morning in bed together, and it's the last time that they will share a bed. They go to the train station. Emile gets on a train. Isobel does not. And the last line of, I loathe reading plot summaries from the back, but the last sentence is really compelling. It is a story about what comes after a love story. More on this next week. For Pride, I'm going to be starting this Indigenous novel, Daughters of the Deer, by Danielle, and this is a historical novel, and I talked about it in the Pride video. Another of my reading projects this year is that Thomas, formerly of the Readers, gave me some homework. He gave me 4 books that he said I should read, and one of them is Coral Glynn by Peter Cameron, an author I have read and enjoyed in the past, and this was featured on my recent library vlog, and I was completely hooked by, I think, the top of page 2, so I stopped reading because I knew this is a book that I very much want to read, so I can't wait to get started. And this is set in 1950. The titular protagonist goes to an isolated mansion in the 1950s to take care of a dying old woman. Plot ensues, and there was just something about it that struck me as vaguely Pimian. I can't wait to find out more. From my Pride TBR, I'm going to start this collection of lesbian short stories by a Canadian writer I'd never heard of, Faye Guenther, Swimmers in Winter. This was a birthday present from Lindy. These stories span a century of lesbian lives in Toronto, I think. It's set in Toronto. I'm really excited to start this. Equally excited to start Christopher DiRaddo, a gay Canadian writer from Montreal, his second novel, The Family Way. I loved his debut novel, which I recently reviewed, The Geography of Pluto, and looking forward to getting to his quite chunky second novel. Also, this short story collection, published I think in the 80s, late 70s, early 80s, from an American writer, Richard Hall. Letters from a Great Uncle and Other Stories. This is a gay Polish novel, and I'm going to have a pseudo buddy read with Bertie Lombardi about it later this month. 11 Inch by, I wonder what the title means. 11 Inch by Michal Witkowski, translated from the Polish by W. Martin, and it's about teenage male hustlers, or maybe not all male, I don't know, but teenage sex workers from Poland, and where are they doing their sex work? Across Europe, but mostly Vienna, apparently. And finally, this is also Caribathon this month. I don't know if there's actually a Caribathon unofficially happening. Maybe there is. If there is, I'll put a link in the show notes. Yay, I just checked. And Karen of Run Right Reads put up her announcement video just a few days ago, and I somehow missed it. Link in the show notes. But I'm having a pseudo buddy read of one of the hottest Caribbean novels to come out last year, with none other than Nyambura from Nairobi, Hungry Ghosts by Kevin Jared Hosein. And it's set in Trinidad. The story opens in the 1940s. I don't want to know another darn thing about it. I'm going to start reading it this week, and Nyambura and I are going to have a Zoom chat about it at the end of the month. Well, I had just an incredible reading week, and the reading week coming up sounds pretty damn promising too, I must say. That's all I got. Thanks for watching.